Yes, thank you for the report backs. And I think what's striking is so many were quite similar things about getting access to things online, be it the cheapest energy deal, filling in forms and things like that. I think we forget that not everyone gets online, and there is a discrimination issue about that. Yes, I think we need to train more people and give people the support they need, but we also have to recognise that some people might not wish to do that and that they shouldn't be discriminated against just because they were brought up in a generation where there wasn't a lot of computers. So I get that. I think we just need to have more thought about it. I cover the Highlands and Islands, and even those who would like to have a computer often don't have access to broadband. So, you know, getting things online is almost impossible in some communities. With regard to health and social care and the integration, I think this is something that we really have to push along. We've got the bill, but we need to do an awful lot more about getting the integration right, because what we find is people ending up in hospital who shouldn't be in hospital would be much better looked after at home, but it's getting those services into place quite quickly. And this morning, before I came down the road, I met with an organisation called Boleskine Care. Boleskine is a small community on Loch Ness. They were having real trouble getting care at home for their elderly people in the community. A lot of people they were seeing needed care at home. There was other people in hospital who couldn't get home, and yet they knew those people in the community who would be willing to provide that care. But what those people in the community weren't willing to do was to travel out with their area to work at home care. So the community took it all in their own hands. They spoke to a social enterprise called Highland Home Care, which was kind of an offshoot of local government home carers who actually contracted with the local authority and set up a social enterprise. They used self-directed support budgets, and they created this organisation, which is Boleskine Care. They recruit and keep the care staff, and they work within the community, and they also can refer people for services, so for assessments and the like. So not only do GPs in the community refer people, social workers and indeed Boleskine Care can as well. So it seemed to me like a really good model where communities could actually take in their own hands the care that was required, bring people together, pool their self-directed support and get the care in the community that was actually going to work. And they were looking at doing things like transport, handyman schemes and the like, all coming out of that. So there are good ideas out there. It's kind of spreading that best practice. So I would like to see that go further. A lot of people talked about their own place on the health and community care authorities, be that in Highland, for instance, they have decided that there'll be lead authorities, but most other authorities are creating separate boards. The third sector interface is a good starting point because they should be able to interact with the new boards, and I think it's very important that SOPA interacts with their third sector interfaces to make sure they make full use of that as one of the biggest service users. I think also as well, looking at somebody mentioned forms and funding and the like, I think the third sector interface is really good for doing that as well. So I think really make friends there, become involved there and make sure that you get your say. A number of other issues, buses, I totally agree with you, they need regulation. Ian Gray, one of my colleagues, was bringing forward a bill. Unfortunately, it didn't come into the Parliament, but I think he will continue to pursue that. I think it's important that we have buses that are regulated and serve their communities. And on food banks, I think it's a disgrace. Anybody in this day and age is living from food from a food bank, and I think it's it's on all of us to make sure that that doesn't happen. I never thought I would see a day when folk lived and fed themselves out of food banks, and it's kind of a disgrace. I think it is a disgrace.
Yeah, Rhoda's touched on quite a few of the issues, so I'll not rehearse what Rhoda's gone over, although really just to say that I endorse a lot of what she's actually said. One of the groups, when they were actually giving the feedback, said person-centred, and there was also the integrated aspect that was mentioned. Now, if we take those two facts together, person-centred and integrated, because it's very seldom that we reach, say, a particular age and don't have, for instance, maybe a medical problem or a problem that impacts on our mobility. And when we look at that person-centred approach, we've got to take that person, what their needs are, but not just their particular needs, but the needs of maybe their family or the wider community, the house they live in, the community they live in, and all those factors. So, you know, we are looking, and Rhoda and I are both on the Health and Sport Committee, and we are looking at the carers, which was mentioned there. We're looking at ways in which we try and ensure that people do have a voice. I think that's really important. Within the Parliament, we have a carers cross-party group. We have a cross-party group on the veterans as well, so your points are well made regarding veterans. And can I say that those are aspects that have been discussed on a really regular basis, actually, within the cross-party group. There's also a cross-party group on the funerals. And I think one of the interesting things you mentioned there was a social enterprise aspect in funerals. It's something I'd certainly never considered myself. However, it's maybe something we should take away and certainly think about. But I think you're absolutely right that we need to look at how funeral costs have accelerated over the years. And in certain parts of the country, the cost of funerals are more than double, in fact, in certain areas, more than treble of that in other communities. So we need to look at how we try and ensure that people aren't being asked to pay more than I think is necessary at the end of the day. In other topics, I think given the time constraints that we have today, it's probably best that we open the floor to questions. But can I say that I look forward to seeing the executive summary of the reports from your workshops and the recommendations, and not just recommendations, I think asks, because we did hear there, you know, in terms of make it mandatory for an older person to be on the health integrated boards, and I think, you know, you have a point. So it's how we try and ensure that health boards can actually take these things forward, and what actually governments can do. So let's be fair, you know, you have a voice, and governments, I sincerely hope, listen to that voice. But within your communities, I don't know how many of you are active within your community councils, for instance. If not, I do urge you. And how many are active within their community radio stations? Get in there. How many of you, offer peer support to maybe other members in your community? If you have the ability and the capability and the time to be able to help within a peer respected group, then, you know, the IT training is an excellent one. And there's many groups out there that do offer community support as well. So it's a question of where is the knowledge, how do you get to it, and how do you access it? And one other point, someone mentioned loop systems. I think there is a really important part in terms of how we communicate with people. And it's not all digital, it's not all technical, because we need to ensure that people who don't have access actually still get that information in a format that is accessible to them. And if that format is something that requires to be made as a person-centred approach, then perhaps that's exactly what we should do.
Yeah, I'll maybe add one or two things to Dennis and Rhoda, and particularly both of them talked about being on the Health and Sport Committee, which is a very important committee for the topics that we are talking about today. I'm on the Equal Opportunities Committee, where equality is very much a strand as well, which is throughout the day came out, and particularly the Cabinet Secretary this morning, and we heard about the difficulties with the Equality Act, for example, and how to interpret it. So you'll be all delighted. I know that SOPA got involved and came and give evidence, and that was very important. I think SOPA does a fantastic job as interacting not only with the government, not only with MSP, but as well with our committees. And at the Equal Opportunities Committee, in a few days' time, you'll see a report that we have on the social isolation and loneliness, which is a very important report, which addresses a lot of the issues that you talked about during the day, not only the issue of transport, but Rhoda talked about, very, very important in our rural areas, but as well in our urban areas, because it's not because you've got public transport that is something which is accessible to all or is suitable for that kind of visit that you want to take. It's got to be multi-approach, which is very very important. And what Dennis talked about, talking about that person approach, I think it's very, very important that doctors, that social workers and everybody understand, especially in the health service, that it's not a patient approach that we need. It's a person approach. It's got to be person-centered and not patient-centered. Sometimes a doctor or a nurse will see only a patient and will not see the person behind it and all the other issues. It's not only the age, it's social issues, it's housing, it's have people being in a food bank or not. I was surprised to hear today somebody saying in one of the group that more than 50% of people going to the local food bank were elderly people. And it's something that we have to realize. We live in a day and age where there are a lot of variety, and we see today, I talked about it this morning, and we can see that this afternoon. We are a very varied kind of people with different issues, so it's very, very important that not only social care, but the health services as well, and particularly the integrated services, see people as people and not as patients as they used to. So if I can leave it to you for organizing some questions now, I can open to the floor for questions.